Welcome to Profit Talks. Today we're here with Alexander McCobin. We're in Brasilia, and it's an honor to have you here, Alex.
It's just a real honor to be here, especially since we go so far back with each other. I just love what you're doing with Hayek Global College and love the chance to get to catch up with you.
Yeah, awesome. So let me just go through what you have done, and then you can also introduce yourself and tell you where you're at today. So Alexander, he's the co-founder of Students for Liberty, which is where we come back from back in the day. I had a chapter of Students for Liberty in the beginning of Students for Liberty in Florida Gulf Coast University. And Alexander was in charge of, were you president of the organization? Yeah,
That's right.
he was president of the organization and making sure it was growing. And it really became an impressive worldwide organization that is in every corner of the world today. And later, he became the CEO of Conscious Capitalism, a nonprofit that deals with businesses all across the world too, right, Alex? And now he's founder and CEO of Liberty Ventures. So Alex, could you briefly just walk us through your trajectory in all these ventures?
Sure, because it is a winding journey, and the context behind them all really helps explain how this happened, because what I'm doing now is nothing like what I intended to when I was younger. When I was a teenager, I had some entrepreneurial instincts, started and ran a few small businesses, both for-profit and nonprofit, but I was really passionate and idealistic when I was young, wanted to change the world, become freer, more moral, more just, and so thought clearly I need to become a philosophy professor to do that. That's how you change the world.
Change ideas. Right?
Exactly. I'm going to be the next John Locke, the next Aristotle. You know, that was in my mind. But after a few years in the ivory tower, I realized it wasn't all I thought it was cracked up.
You were in the middle of your PhD?
I was working on my PhD. I was ABD, all but dissertation. I had passed my
dissertation.
Yep. And I was working on the dissertation and started to realize this wasn't my path. I love philosophy, but I wanted to do something.
Was there a specific episode that made you change your mind when you were at your...
No, it was just a lot of things that built up. And realistically, you can even ask my professors, we all knew, I was spending more time volunteering for Students for Liberty. I was running Students for Liberty while a graduate student.
That must be a lot of work.
It was a lot of work. And I was spending more time on Students for Liberty than on my graduate studies. And at a certain point, we all realized maybe I should just focus on Students for Liberty instead of trying to become a philosophy professor.
Yeah, and we're glad you did. It became a huge organization when you were taking care of it.
And then that's what happened. I dropped out with just a master's and went and got to focus on Students for Liberty for a few years. And like I said, I'd been volunteering and building it up while a graduate student for a long time. And while I was at Students for Liberty... You were
working as a volunteer for a long time at Students for Liberty?
Yeah. We were up to something like 9 or 12 full-time staff before I started getting paid at SFL.
Wow. That's impressive, actually, how long you were working as a volunteer.
Well, I mean, I cared so much about this organization and the cause. I knew I was going to volunteer no matter what for this. As we were raising more money and building it up, I knew I needed to pay other people to get more help with it. I was happy to do it for free. I needed other people to get paid to build this.
And what's the story behind Students for Liberty and becoming international? Because it was quite impressive, the scope and the size that you had in the United States. But I'm curious to know, how was the process of becoming an international organization like it is today?
So that's actually a really good story, because the first Students for Liberty conference was international. We actually had students from 3 countries there in 2008, which we didn't expect. And that was already the first signs to us that this could be an international organization.
They were coming from countries outside the United States for the conference?
Yeah, we had a group from Canada, and we had one girl from Ukraine actually show up, which was really surprising and impressive to us.
That's cool.
But for the first couple of years, we were still U.S. focused. We were all U.S. leaders. We didn't know how to expand internationally, even though we were getting requests from students around the globe saying they wanted to be a part of this and they wanted our help. But we said, we don't know how to help you, and actually turned down those requests for a while. And that was the smart thing for us to do, because we weren't sure how to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And we kept getting these requests from students around the world and had a big debate actually amongst the leadership whether we should go international or not. And there was a lot of opposition to it because we didn't know what to do. We were still a young, small organization. Why put the resources into this? But I could see that there was something to this. There was just too much demand. And we had figured out a model that worked in the US. I said, we need to try this at least. Let's pick one region in the world, Europe to begin with, because that's where we were getting the most requests from students to expand to. Just focus on that for a year and see if it works. If it doesn't, we won't go international anymore. But if it does, maybe we can do more. And so we just put a call out. We replicated the model that was working for us in the US, found leadership on the ground over in Europe, and said, let's see what we can do. And there were a lot of challenges with that. We nearly canceled doing it multiple times for various reasons. We picked the wrong leader at one point. I was telling you before, I nearly got kicked out of the UK because I said the wrong thing at customs going to the first leadership retreat there. But at the first European Students for Liberty conference, after we were building this up for about 6 months, we saw the impact. We saw hundreds of European students coming together and saying this was the most amazing thing ever. And we realized, okay, we've hit on something. And we were getting demands from other regions. And so we adopted a strategy of just going one region a year. So we kept saying no to a lot of students in different parts of the world. We can't help you. In the future, we'll be able to, but we need to go slow and methodical and make sure we do this right. So we went from Europe to the Spanish-speaking Americas, to Brazil, to Africa, to South Asia, then to Australia, New Zealand, and to the rest of the world. And it took a long time, but it was a really effective strategy to make sure we did it right.
Amazing. And how was managing all these groups of people in different countries, right? Because I can imagine it was quite complex because you were used to running the organization in the United States, and all of a sudden you have all these talents around the world that you have to manage. How was it that you guys were managing all this?
I mean, even managing all these student leaders in the United States was challenging because this was in the late 2000s to begin with. We did not have Zoom back then. We didn't have the technology right now. Our first trainings for students were all done by phone. We did conference calls to do leadership trainings virtually for people. And when we started to go international, we had Skype back then, which was the best tool where we didn't have video. It was again just audio talking to people running these trainings. And then we had to make significant investments in in-person retreats, which we kept doing because there's a lot of value to that. But it was very challenging.
And expensive too, right?
And expensive. And that was actually one of the things that we questioned when we were going international. Did we have the money to do this? Because we knew we needed to put on in-person trainings and in-person events to have the impact we wanted.
And how was it with the donors? So a great merit of your work with Students for Liberty was able to raise money for the organization. And how was it going internationally with the donors in the United States?
Well, at first, we just did it because it was the right thing and because we had the budget to do it. We set the money aside. And then as we started to get traction, some donors said, well, we should stay focused on the US. You shouldn't be doing that. But we had a handful of other donors who saw the potential with this. And I was able to communicate really compelling stories of students doing great work on the ground around the world that spurred their interest. And we never really figured out how to do a lot of fundraising internationally, but we were able to find enough donors in the US who cared about what students were doing around the world in order to grow it.
Yeah, and it's in my point of view, like the work you're doing, for example, Students for Liberty is doing in Africa, in several countries around Africa. It's probably the most effective way to bring prosperity to those countries, right? Because
100%.
You're getting to the young leaders who are changing minds of people around them and bringing entrepreneurship, bringing things that actually are the things that bring prosperity in the long run, right? So if there is one way that we can bring prosperity to the countries that we wish to get them to the level where other countries are in the world, that's probably the best way, right?
Well, I mean, this goes back to what liberty really means. It's not just a moral or political position, as you're pointing out. liberty is the key to human prosperity everywhere in the world. The concepts of the rule of law, where everyone is accountable to the same rules, private property, where people are able to make investments in themselves and so create value for others, that spurs entrepreneurship, the idea of creating value that didn't exist before and driving people into a capitalist system to be capitalists themselves and creating that value is what has driven humanity forward the last 200 years since Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, and is going to be key to the future. And that's why it's so important to spread these ideas around the world.
Exactly. And so this brings us to the point of the conscious capitalist movement, right? So what is this all about? What is the conscious capitalism organization?
So conscious capitalism is an idea started by a group of business leaders and academics, including John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods Market in the United States. Incredibly successful business, and John's an incredibly successful business leader. And he always ran his business on a very different motto from what's commonly taught. Instead of saying the purpose of Whole Foods or any business that he started is to make as much money as possible, he always said, I have a higher purpose. I'm trying to create some greater value for other people in the world, treat them as best as I possibly can, and the returns will come. Profit's a good thing, but it's a byproduct of creating this other value in the world. And he started to find other business leaders who agreed with him, wrote a book about this in 2013. And this is the winding journey of my career and how life works in interesting ways. When John wrote that book, he decided he was going to go on a speaking tour to promote it. And he was someone who had advocated for liberty that I had wanted to get in touch with for a long time for Students for Liberty. So what did I do? Well, we, as an organization, we invited him to come speak at the International Students for Liberty Conference, but not just to do a favor for us. We gave him an award, the Alumnus of the Year Award, to honor and recognize him and give him a platform to promote his book. So as he's doing the tour, he comes out and speaks at our conference. And he decides he loves what Students for Liberty is doing. You mentioned I did a lot of fundraising in order to do this. He became a donor.
Awesome.
And John went from being a donor to Students for Liberty to a mentor to me personally, an advisor to Students for Liberty, and then a friend. And in 2016, conscious capitalism was going through a change. It wanted to really start growing. And because he not only wrote a book about this, he started a nonprofit to spread the philosophy. And he was impressed enough by what I had done at Students for Liberty, and others on the Conscious Capitalism board were too, that they invited me to come and take over Conscious Capitalism. And so for 6 years, I got to work with not only John, but other incredible business leaders across the Conscious Capitalism movement, like Ron Shaich, the founder of Panera Bread, Kip Tyndall, the founder of The Container Store, and thousands of others who I have tremendous respect for, and work with them in not only developing their businesses, but in developing this philosophy and sharing it with other business leaders and learning a ton along the way about the for-profit space that up to that point I'd had a little interaction with, but not nearly as much while I was running Students for Liberty.
So it was a good transition for you from the nonprofit world to the for-profit world, interacting with these business people in the conscious capitalist movement.
100%. And that was honestly an intentional choice on my part, because I love Students for Liberty and I gained so much from it. But at a certain point, by the time I actually transitioned to conscious capitalism, I was thinking to myself, I've learned as much as I could from Students for Liberty, and I've given as much as I could. And it was time both for some new perspective there, but also for me to go and get a different experience. And conscious capitalism was an organization I cared deeply about. The philosophy, I think, is absolutely correct to this day. Even though I'm not running the organization anymore, I consider myself a conscious capitalist now. I went from running the association to being a member, and it was the perfect transition for me.
Fantastic. And it's a counterintuitive point to me as a libertarian to think about having a higher purpose before maximizing your profits, right? And we totally think it's okay to maximize your profits, but you should have a higher purpose to motivate yourself and even others around you in order to reach the profits that you want, right?
That's right. And this specifically flies in the face of what Milton Friedman, a hero to so many of us, explicitly said. He wrote a whole article about this, and it's one of the things he's most famous for, saying that the social responsibility of business is to maximize profits. right? And that's been what's taught in business schools. That's what most corporate leaders have said is the guiding purpose of their businesses for decades. Over 50 years ago, he wrote that. But look, I love Milton Friedman and I love making profit. It's a great thing, as I said before. But I think when Friedman wrote that, it was a precursor to the concept of clickbait. I don't think that's what Friedman actually meant at the end of the day. And there actually was a debate between John Mackey and Milton Friedman in Reason magazine in the early 2000s.
Oh, really?
When John was developing this idea of conscious capitalism. Yeah.
Interesting.
And if you read that article, it's great. Everyone should Google it and check it out. Friedman keeps revising his position and basically adopting John's at the end of the day.
That's in Reason magazine?
It's in Reason magazine.
Awesome.
It's available online.
That's something to look up.
But John kept holding to the key point here that I think is right, that profits follow purpose, not the other way around. And it gets back to the whole point of capitalism itself, a free and voluntary exchange of goods and services for the mutual benefit of everyone involved. And when you think about that, what you're talking about in creating value is that value is more subjective than just the concept of profit. Profit really is a byproduct. And when you put profit first, you create gamesmanship in the concept of running a business that can undermine creating value. Because guess what? There are business people who commit fraud. There are business people who manipulate finances instead of creating real tangible value. When what we really want and what we get out of the capitalist system is that entrepreneurial spirit of value creation, where people are doing things that weren't done before and get rewarded for it, absolutely. But you've got to focus on that value first. And that's what purpose really is, that new value creation.
And that is true. And not even in the, you don't even need to go to the fraud to think about how the individual interest of certain executives can undermine the team goal of the entire business, right? Because you could game the goals and think about ways into for your getting your personal benefits as an executive, and that happens all the time in corporate,
all the time
business. In what it's interesting, I had an episode when I was in the Antigua Forum. It was it was at the time when Hayek Global College was just an idea, right? And I was explaining, there was this forum with a bunch of libertarians that actually believe in the free market system. And I got a question from Gabriel Calzada, who was the president of UFM at the time.
Great guy.
And he asked me, why are you doing this? I'm like, well, that's an easy question. Because I want to make money. And he's like, oh, no, in Spanish accent. Oh, wrong answer. You have to have a vision. You have to have a purpose. Like that, yeah, he's right. And the thoughts came to me with the great leaders that actually did amazing things for the world. For example, Steve Jobs, Elon Musk. They don't talk about profits. They talk about doing great things, right? I want to make a dent in the universe. I want to bring a man to Mars and things like that. And that's really what moves us forward, right?
100%. And especially if you're going to be an entrepreneur, it is so incredibly challenging. The likelihood of you succeeding is actually low with any individual business that you start. Something like 80% of new businesses fail. But so if you're going to do this, your driving motivation can't be to make as much money as possible, because guess what? There are better ways to make money than being an entrepreneur, than to starting a business. You need to have a vision that does drive you. You need a higher purpose behind what you're doing, and believe that you are going to get profits and it's going to make money for you in the long run. But without that vision, without that purpose, you're going to give up, and you probably should give up and just go work for someone else's vision and purpose.
Yeah. I've been feeling that in my skin with Hayek Global College. From the beginning, it's very hard to start a new business. And you hear that from every entrepreneur, right? You get beat down, and it's not really rational if you think about it in the rational economic perspective.
Oh, no, you got to be a little crazy to start a business.
It makes no sense. And which brings us now to what you're doing right now, right? So
that I'm crazy? You're right.
Yeah, also that. And also that you've decided to start a new business. And it's kind of like a meta thing. You started your new business, which is Liberty Ventures, to look for people who are starting new businesses and evaluate new businesses to see if it's a viable venture, right? So before we talk about Liberty Ventures, let's just tell us, how was the transition? Why did you decide to start our for-profit venture fund? How did that work?
Well, after working alongside so many incredible business leaders for so long, the entrepreneurial bug was biting me. And I had realized through my experience at Conscious Capitalism the power of for-profit businesses to make the world freer and more prosperous. I decided it was time for me to go into that sector. And when I first left Conscious Capitalism, I wasn't sure what business I was going to start. As you know, I tried a couple out and some of them failed spectacularly. They were the wrong ideas. It wasn't the right thing for me. But I kept listening to other stakeholders and I saw what people were asking me to do and what was starting to get traction. And it became apparent to me that business leaders not only want to be in community with those who share their values, they don't want to just go to conferences and meetings with them. They want to do business with other people who share their values, who think like them, who do business like them. And there weren't and still aren't that many venues for them to do that. And I had informally started to make connections between investors and startups just as friends to help them grow. I had started to provide some advisory services to companies to help them improve revenue operations and build up their talent. And I started to just realize if I want to do more of this, which I did, need to turn this into a business and bring other people on to help me and figure out how to do this. And from that, the concept of Liberty Ventures was born, where we are very explicitly building the ecosystem of values-aligned business leaders, investors, executives, and entrepreneurs who are all committed to a free and prosperous future. And we're helping them scale their businesses, get the best returns possible, make as much money as they can in order to make the greatest impact that they can. And doing that through a variety of things, ranging from early stage investing to revenue operations, to talent recruitment, to now putting on events and programs to very explicitly connect these like-valued business leaders, like with our first Principled Business Summit that we just ran a month ago at Richard Branson's Necker Island, where we brought together luminaries like John Mackey and Joe DeSena, the founder of Spartan Racing, and Prue Leith, who people may know from the Great British Bake Off, but is an incredibly successful businesswoman in her own right, and 40 other great investors, executives, and entrepreneurs together to talk about how they're running their businesses, to use it as a force for good, and find ways to work together to collaborate in order to spur this on. And that's what we're going to keep building out in order to build this movement.
That's impressive what you're doing already. I'm uneasy because you don't seem to have any financial background. You have background in the in the nonprofit industry. You made quite impressive in our organizations. But how does that work? How can you be so successful as a venture capitalist with a background in the nonprofit industry?
Well, not just the nonprofit industry. Remember, I studied philosophy. We didn't have accounting classes in philosophy.
Exactly.
So you're absolutely right there. But in my mind, running a for-profit and running a nonprofit, there are some important differences. But if you are able to build, but I learned a lot running Students for Liberty and Conscious Capitalism. And those are businesses in and of themselves. And I've been involved in a number of other businesses before too, in different roles. So I have some experience with this that I'm bringing to the table. And I know that I don't know everything. I say that to everyone I talk to about this, every investor and entrepreneur. I'm learning here. And that's why we're going slow and methodical. That's why we didn't start by raising a fund for our investments. We started by creating an angel investor syndicate, which went from 25 investors when we launched at South by Southwest last year to over 320 now in the network. And what that means is we review opportunities to invest in startups. And to help me with that, I also have brought on partners, analysts who are committing themselves with a lot more experience at this, to reviewing the deals, to talking with the founders, and preparing memos, then doing the proper diligence to tell me if something is a good investment opportunity or not. But we don't leave it there. I take opportunities to our investor network and say, here's what we think is really interesting. Take a look at our memo, take a look at the decks, take a look at all this information. You tell us if you think this is an interesting opportunity that you want to invest in or not. And If our investors do, they tell me why. We go and syndicate an investment in the startup and raise money. Or our investors say, nope, here's why I don't think it's a good investment. And we learn through that with our investors. So we're going slow. We're bringing the right people on to help us learn that background. But the other thing I'll say is there's also a certain advantage to not having this background, to not coming from the venture capital world as we're building up this venture play, because our strategy is very different. That's our unfair advantage in the space, because my background really is in movement building, and not many venture capitalists have that experience. So we're attracting incredible investors and entrepreneurs and experts and advisors to work with us from that background, because I'm finding that I've got some strategies and ideas for how to do that not many other people have used before, and it's getting people incredibly excited about this. And that's creating a very different kind of company and network than the others that we see out there, that is giving us opportunities and advantages that others don't have.
That's it's amazing how you say that, because I'm reminded of your lecture you gave yesterday to the summit, in which you talk about two of the P's, which is people. Surround yourself with great people. And also I'll add to that, being humble enough to know what you don't know and understand where to get the information, right? And also the purpose, having a higher purpose for what you're doing and how you are able to bring all these people. But now I have a question, which you probably have heard a lot already. Shouldn't you be worried with just having the highest ROI possible, the highest return on investment possible in the ventures you're looking for? Why would you need to be values aligned when looking for great investments?
So we're still working on the messaging for this. It's part of us growing. I mean, we've been doing this for 11 months now. It's still early days. So I want to be really clear. We do want the highest ROI possible. I do want to maximize profit. And everything that we're doing is part of our strategy to achieve that. And here's what I mean by that. When we want to bring together values-aligned investors and entrepreneurs, part of that is a branding and marketing play. That's a calling card that attracts people to us. It not only makes us stand out, but it brings in people who want to work with us because we share their values. For entrepreneurs, this is a big deal right now, because there are a lot of founders who are getting kicked out of their companies because they're not in alignment with the values of their investors who get control of the company, and they say the wrong thing or they run into some tension and conflict.
Can you give us an example of that? That's interesting.
I mean, there are just so many out there in the media now where a founder says the wrong thing, or they don't want to adopt certain policies.
Like ESG or those types of things?
Yeah, that's happening a ton nowadays. And if you don't bring on the right investors who are committed to the purpose of the company and the founder, that can happen. And we're hearing this from founders, that they're looking at the values of their investors and want people who are aligned with them to make sure that the company stays true to its purpose and that they get to remain in that seat if they're delivering value, if they're building up a successful company. But it's not just a marketing play. It really is about getting investors and entrepreneurs on the same page to be creative, to build trust with each other very quickly, to not feel like they have to tiptoe around each other, which leads to them working together more effectively, which leads to better ideas for how to build the company and leads to introductions and stronger networks, and so a higher ROI. So again, I'm going to be really clear. We want the highest ROI possible. That is our purpose. And this is a strategy that we think is going to help achieve that not many other people are doing. I know of only a handful of others that are taking this approach, but we think is going to be a really successful strategy to deliver returns to our investors and help our entrepreneurs be more successful as well.
If someone is not aligned to the values of Liberty and the values that you defend on Liberty Ventures, but is a good investment, would you consider investing?
We talked about this, and I think for the right opportunity, yeah, because we want to deliver the best returns to our investors, and that wouldn't be everything that we do. We would also need to make sure that the business idea itself isn't working against liberty, even though we're not investing in companies that explicitly advance liberty. We're investing in companies that are in AI or health and wellness or literally any industry vertical. we would have to take that on a case-by-case basis and only in a few situations. But this is also a good filtering mechanism for us because there are so many investment opportunities out there. There are so many startups. How do you filter them in the first place?
Yeah. Especially at the early stage, right?
At the very early stage, yeah. If we're investing in the founders to begin with, this is just an easy way for us to say, all right, these 1,000 proposals, we're not going to look at those. Let's look at these other 1,000 instead that we're getting. Or realistically, we've looked at about 200 deals since we started. We're able to throw a lot of deals out if we know the founder isn't aligned with us, so that we can really dig into the other opportunities and find the best ones there.
Do you believe that having a founder or a manager, business person aligned with the values of liberty, someone that believes in liberty, makes him a better business person just by having I want to say the right idea, the ideas of liberty?
Great question. No. Unfortunately, the answer is no. I don't think if you understand liberty, that if you understand the principles of economics, free market economics, that does not make you a better business person, unfortunately. There are too many examples of that not being the case. But I think, so I want to be clear, that's not our thesis. It is that business people want to work with those who share their values, and that this is a way to build trust. It's a way to attract the best deals and filter out some deals that we don't need to spend our time working on. And this is something that we need to improve. And this is one of the reasons that there are a lot of business people out there who don't support free market economics, because just because you run a business doesn't mean you understand economics. And just because you understand economics doesn't mean you're going to be successful at business. There is, for some reason, a disconnect there that we need to bridge.
That's interesting. I tend to think, I'm an economist, so I tend to be biased and say that if you understand the basics of economics, you'll be a better business person. Like, for example, understanding the sunk cost fallacy. I often see experienced business people not taking that into consideration. And I was inclined to think about if you're aligned to the values of liberty, it would make you a better business. Not necessarily, because you have to have the experience of business, right? You have to know something specific and persistency. There's a lot of things that come to it. That's not necessarily just the right ideas. But you bring a different point to the table, that not necessarily if you're aligned with liberty, you're going to be a better businessman. So that's quite unique. It's interesting.
There are a lot of people who don't support liberty, there are a lot of people who really dislike capitalism, who are successful capitalists. And it may sound counterintuitive, but that happens a lot, actually.
Yeah, it is true. The other day I was seeing business leaders and billionaire business leaders in Davos defending wealth tax, for example. And it made no sense to me. Why would that happen, right? But it does happen a lot.
And there are a lot of reasons for it. That could be that they feel guilty. Some of them just inherit their companies rather than build them up themselves. Could be that they're part of big corporations, which are largely bureaucracies rather than entrepreneurial endeavors. I think there is one key difference here. Most successful entrepreneurs have a basic understanding of why capitalism matters and are pro-capitalism, because they've built it from the ground up. They really are the heroes of the system.
And what do you look for in a founder? What makes a good founder?
So I don't have many unique insights to this. If you listen to incredibly successful investors like Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen, or any Jason Calacanis or anyone else, you're going to hear the same things. At the end of the day, they've got to be incredibly smart. They have to be incredibly driven, have grit to get through all of the challenges. They've got to be willing to learn and be humble enough to take feedback from everyone else, but also a little crazy enough to know when to keep driving forward with their vision when other people tell them not to. And at the end of the day, it's incredibly subjective, especially in early stage investing. You have to ask yourself, is this the kind of founder, and not just founder, but team of founders, because you really want to have a team that works well together. So that, because if it's just one person, they could get burned out. If they decide they're going to do something else or get hit by a bus, that's it. You need a team as backup, and you need them to work really well together. You need to see that they've got the passion for this idea, the willingness to learn and pivot the idea in order to be successful, and the grit to get to overcome whatever challenges come their way. So that honestly, if it's not this business or this idea, they're going to be successful in anything they do in life. That's what you're really looking for. And that takes a lot, that's one level subjective, but it's also a lot of pattern recognition and just talking to enough of them, working with enough of them that you start to figure out who that applies to and who not, and play a game of statistics. Because no matter how much diligence you do on these early companies, you still know most of them are not going to succeed. And that's okay. That's just part of the process. That's why you invest in a lot of companies and you work with a lot of them, so that one or a few of them hit and are incredibly successful, which overcomes all of the others that aren't.
Do you have any specific strategies of interviewing or filtering these people?
So the big thing I've learned over my short stint in this, we're still really young, remember, actually aligns with everything else that I've learned over my whole career the last 20 years, which is I like to test people out and to give it some time. You don't need to make a decision immediately. And even if it's a no, typically it's a no, not right now. Mm-hmm. There's always another chance to take a bite at the apple. May not be at the same terms, maybe a different situation, but it's all relationship based. And so want to see what people do, want to see how they interact with others, and want to see what they are able to accomplish without getting funding right now, just by bootstrapping it, and what grit they show there. And as you build up the relationships, see what they do, learn more about them, you get a pretty good sense of who they are.
I find it quite, knowing you for a while, and I find it quite impressive how you can keep a relationship with so many people in your network. And even the way you say now, when I'm talking to a founder, a no can be not right now, and you still keep the relationship. And networking is a huge part of what you're doing, right? With investors and founders, you have to bring the right people together and create this ecosystem that you're creating. What are the tips that you can give people to network the way you do?
So I've been very methodical about this because I am naturally an introvert. When I was a kid, I didn't have many friends when I was a kid. I was very socially awkward. I was uncomfortable around other people. And at a certain point, I realized I wanted to change that. And especially as I started to build organizations, I knew I had to change that.
How old were you when that happened?
Once I started to become a teenager, it began to change. But then especially when I went to college and when I started to create businesses and nonprofits, I really knew I had to change that. And so worked on it. And there are a couple of things that I really started to do, and I think are helpful tips for other people, perhaps. At least this would work for me, maybe it'll work for them. The first is to get over the fear of initiating outreach to people and just go and do it. Like, if you want to meet someone, just reach out to them. If you're at a conference or you're at a party or a reception, just go up and start talking to them instead of standing in the corner and being shy and awkward about it. That's what I did when I was younger. And then I said, you know what, I'm just going to go and stick my hand out, introduce myself, ask, and learn about them. And it works. People want to build relationships. And guess what? You can do the same thing with really impressive, successful people just by cold calling them, by sending cold emails, direct mail, physical letters to them. Not enough people do that. But I can't tell you how many relationships I've built with amazing individuals who are wildly more successful than me, wildly more impressive, because I just sent them a cold email or just sent them a letter out of the blue and they responded to me. So that's the first thing I would say. The second then is respond when people reach out to you. Don't close them off.
That's a big one.
It's a huge one. And people...
It's simple, but most people don't do it.
Unfortunately, no. They turn down invitations. They don't take phone calls. They don't respond when people reach out to them. And I think that's doing a disservice to yourself when you do. I try to say yes to as many invitations I get as possible. And it's not always possible, especially now when last weekend, I had 4 conferences I was invited to be at, and I can't be everywhere at once. But say yes. And if you can't do something, try to find some other way to at least initiate the relationship with someone.
Or maybe just respond with a no, right?
Say, sorry, I've got another commitment right now. Offer a 15-minute virtual meeting, offer a coffee chat, or invite them to an event you put on. Because the other thing you can do then is curate and create your own opportunities to build networks and relationships. It doesn't just have to be big formal conferences. Host a small dinner, host a coffee chat, just say, let's go meet up at the park. It doesn't have to even be expensive. Just create the space for people to connect with you and connect with others. And you become the kind of person that people want to be around, and you start to build out these relationships. And there's a lot more that we can go into, but I think the two key things are initiate the outreach yourself to other people and respond when other people want to initiate the outreach to you. Those are the key starting points to doing this.
These are very good points. And it's surprising to me how you were an introvert naturally, but I can see that there are stories of, for example, great lecturers, even oral coaches who had stutter problems, and then they overcame that and became great talents in speeches and speaking, right? So it's also a great inspiration for people who are introverts or have some type of fear of getting in touch with people, which it's something that they really can work on, right?
Mm-hmm. And when you work on it, you become methodical. I think you can become a lot more successful at it because you've been intentional about it and you know what you're trying to do. And then people who may just have that skill naturally and so take it for granted and don't work on it. You see that with athletes sometimes too. People who have that natural ability just rely on that, and it will get them so far, but they don't invest in the fundamentals. They don't keep training and working on that. And so people who start out without that natural ability but keep working on it can be more successful at that sport or that athletics. Same thing with building relationships with people, because to be clear, I'm not talking about going in and just like trying to use people. I talked about this yesterday. I'm talking about building real relationships and just realizing it takes work to have a relationship with someone. And if you're intentional about that, if you know what it takes and you put the work and the persistence into it, you can be a lot more successful at that than people who take it for granted.
And also think about it as a skill, right?
Yeah.
If the more you reach out to people, the better you're going to get at it.
And figure out what other people care about when you reach out to them. Don't reach out to them asking for favors all the time or asking for things from them. Reach out to them in a way that builds the relationship. Give things to them. Invite them to other things. Make connections for them. Have fun with them. At the end of the day, we all just want to be happy around other people, and we spend time with those who make us happy, who give us energy. So it's not always about business. It's got to be about fun as well, so that people want to be with you. They want to respond to your messages. When they see that you've sent a text to them, they light up and they're going to open it immediately instead of going, oh, what is it this time? Like, that's what you should be thinking about in building relationships with people.
Of course. And Alex, if you were to go back in time in your early teenager or when you were in college or any time in your life, what would you have done differently?
I have two different perspectives on this. One is, as a lot of people who have advised me and have said this before, I've pointed out, we all get to where we are in life from our journeys, from the mistakes that we make, from the lessons that we've learned, and just from the experience. So at one level, I don't know if I'd say there was much I would change. I don't think I could have accelerated getting to where I am right now any faster, because I did not plan on being in the venture business and working with entrepreneurs and building out an ecosystem like this when I started. And I couldn't have done that when I was 18. It took all of the experiences, starting several small businesses before, graduate school, Students for Liberty, Conscious Capitalism, the relationships I built along the way to get here. So I don't know. But at another level, there are some things that I've just learned that I didn't know back then that I think are really valuable. And that is invest in relationships early on and fine tune the way you work on those relationships back in the day. I think I wish there are some hard skills I wish I had studied more when I was younger. I wish I had started studying how to invest in startups or how to do some of these things, some things like that when I was younger.
Maybe.
I mean, I got a hands-on experience with that early on. So I don't know if that's it, but I think so much of what we learn in life comes from our experience and from going through the process of life. So the one thing I would do differently probably is just not be so scared to go out and try things. Everyone is scared at some point when they're getting started. Heck, as an entrepreneur, you know this, there's still a fear when you're on the entrepreneurial journey with what you're doing, and you hold yourself back. And I think the most important thing we can do is, as human beings, is just get over that. Go and try things out. Go reach out to that person that you want to talk to. Go try building up that business that you want to do. Create the MVP. Go study something that you're unsure about. Get over the fear and just go and do it. And that's a lesson that I still apply to myself even to this day.
It reminds me of when I was starting Hayek Global College. I had a lot of years of experience in higher education, but I was an executive. I wasn't a founder of a startup who had to do a lot of the operational work. And it reminds me, when I was recruiting the first professors, it took me a while to just get over I don't know if it was fear or if it was just me procrastinating, but it was part of it was scary, because when I was in a big company, I could rely on the HR to do things. Oh, go reach out to these people, and then I'll just interview them after you have filtered them out, because that's how things work in a bigger company. But when I was at Hayek, I had to reach out to random people and say, like, hey, I have this unique project, which is just like me, and I want to start a new thing. Would you trust me and start just like join me on this crazy project? And I was very hesitant on the beginning. It took me a while, but when I finally did it, I was so glad that I did, and it worked out in the end. So just getting over that scare is a big thing for many things that we're doing, especially the new things, right?
100%. And even if it's not new, there's a certain fear to it every time you do it over again. And we just got to get over that.
Excellent. Was there any question that I should have asked you and I didn't?
Oh my gosh. I mean, there's so much more that we could talk about. I will just say this again, actually, for the podcast. Look, to emphasize one point here, I mentioned before, it's about relationships, and we talked about that before. I mean, our relationship goes back so long. I don't remember how many years. I probably don't care to mention how many years it's been, frankly, for both of our sakes. But I mean, we met back in Students for Liberty days, and look at what you're doing now. Look at where we're at. This all started by just working on some fun projects together back then. And here we are. I'm from the US. I'm down here in Brasilia with you, like supporting what you're doing with Hayek Global College. It's just a great illustration of where things can go in life if you invest in those relationships, if you try things out. And I just want to say how proud I am of you, Edson, and what you're doing with the Hayek Global College, and so excited to see where you take this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alex. And the same is true for you. I'm very proud of what you're doing with Liberty Ventures. I wish you all the prosperity that you can get in it. And it reminds me that it was a couple years until we got reconnected, which was in a simple message that you sent me on LinkedIn, asking for some help in another startup that you were having, right? Before you made the pivot to Liberty Ventures. And I just replied and helped you out. You know, it was something that you were trying to test, and it was something very simple. And then you came and you lectured our students, which was also something very simple. And we restarted the relationship from that, which goes for a long terms. It just comes to reinforce everything you're saying about relationships and responding to people and reaching out.
Exactly. And part of the entrepreneurial journey does involve failures. I remember that company I asked you to test the product out for. It failed miserably, but it was part of the process of figuring out what I should be working on instead. And so anyone listening who is worried about failure, got to get over that too. That's going to happen when you try things out, and that's okay. You learn from that and you move on to it and use the relationships you build as a part of that process to help you out.
Excellent. I always think of Rocky Balboa and that comes up. You know? Life is going to beat you down and you got to keep going up and facing it again.
One of the best speeches in movie history.
Yeah, right. Alex, it was a great honor having you with us today, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Edson.